Okay, the moment that we've been highly anticipating this whole course, building a miner. We'll list off the parts here for you to follow, and we'll connect it a little bit later on to the software and configure it. However, you can also take a look at the ebook, which has a step-by-step guide and the specific parts and where to get them listed in it. I created that as a resource for you to follow along and build this miner if you so choose. The total cost is about $400, a little bit less, and it also depends on where you get the parts. It's really great if you've seen some of the parts that we've sourced out there in previous lessons, or if you've already started researching buying your own ASIC miner or building your own computer. If you're going to go with a GPU that's able to mine Ethereum, remember that the one that's pictured in this build is not currently able to mine Ethereum based on the Ethereum epoch due to the DAG file, taking up about all, if not more, of the 4 GB of RAM in the RX 550 card. You're going to want to get an 8 GB graphics card. Those will cost you about as much as it costs to build this entire build. So something to consider. If you're wanting to mine different coins, Ethereum Classic or other altcoins, this build is still highly relevant and something that you could do on the cheap if you want to build your own custom computer and start mining right away. All the parts used in this are compatible and fit together well. Compatibility you can check if you're looking for different parts online. Just Google a compatibility calculator or search for it in our supplemental readings from previous lessons. Ready to get started? Let's go. Here we are, we're finally at the computer build. Exciting, right? You might see a little cup on here. That's where I'm keeping some of the screws. You'll notice that some of these parts come in these weird plastic bags, and that's to help prevent it being damaged with any sort of static electrical shock. You never want to set your motherboard directly onto the very floor of a case, and all of these components are compatible to the Mini ITX form factor. Now, let's just talk about the pieces we have in front of us. You saw our Silverstone case. We have our anti-static and small Phillips head screwdriver, the pieces that came in this case. We also have our graphics card, our RX 550, our memory, which is here, RAM, very small RAM, 4 GB, Pico PSU or Pico power supply, the plate, and it goes sort of down here. Our motherboard, SATA cables, so you don't need additional SATA cables. So let's start with our case from the back, and I've already removed some screws on the back. There we go. Next, I'm going to disassemble the hard drive cover, which I've already done by taking off some screws on the top and some screws on the side. So take this out and remove those pieces. And then you can see inside our case fan here, as well as some connector cables for all of the USB drives, the microphone jack, the headphone jack, the power button, etc. We have pre-built risers into our case that we're going to set the motherboard on top of. We are going to connect our anti-static bracelet, take the motherboard out of its anti-static packaging, and take a look at the ports on the back side. You saw the CPU heatsink there, it's passive. There's our PCI 16 slot, which lines up with these grates. There's the front of the case, there's the back of the case, and we're going to set the motherboard on top of these 4 risers, which align with the screw holes on the motherboard. It helps you orient the motherboard, but just so you know, that 24-pin connection for the power supply faces the front. The ports face the back, where this faceplate will go that came with our motherboard. Make sure to pre-drill the hole for the external jack for the power supply before you clip it into place, and it just sort of slides into place. Will align with the ports on the back of your motherboard, which will also help you align the motherboard on the risers. So it's really easy to just screw it down once you slide this into place. The external jack will go through a little hole, which I drilled next to the very far left-hand side of the back faceplate. Here you can see me pushing it into place. Now I'm going to screw it in, and we're going to go from there. You also see that I connected the power supply already to the motherboard. I did things a little out of order just so that you could see where the power supply went to orient the motherboard. So there you have it. There's a faceplate. You can see the external jack hole. Now it's time for the SSD, and the 2.5 inch has some guide rails inside it that will help you align the SSD. There's also some screw holes. Some are inset, and it slides right in there. and lines up with those screw holes. There are screw holes already in the SSD as well. Here's another angle for it, and again, those screws might be inset or they might be right up against the surface on the opposite side of this 2.5-inch SSD casing. So screw it in. There's the ones right up on the surface. There are some connections for the power and the SATA cable, which we'll see connected in just a moment, and the two prongs face the front of the case. Orient the power supply like this, and make sure to support it with your fingers underneath the motherboard once you push it into place. It goes to the very far left-hand side if you're looking at the front of the case in the pin slots. It's not going to use all the pin slots. Then you can connect the external jack through the back face panel and cinch it down with the nut and lock washer. There it is. Now the rest of the connections line up with some pins on the motherboard, and there's a lot of little pins. Some of them are really obvious because they correspond with the number of holes on these connections, but you can also look at the motherboard instructional manual to tell you where some of these things go. If you want to know more or in detail about where they go, I did also outline that in the ebook, so it's really easy to follow, and I highlighted where each one of these and gave you kind of a close-up shot, like where we can put the CPU fan, as you see here, in two different spots. These little guys are kind of hard to place just because it's so tiny. Letterings face the front of the case, and I gave you a close-up shot of what that looks like in the ebook as well. There's a SATA cable, going to connect that, as well as the black cable from the PSU that connects to the SSD. They both have a little L shape that matches up with the port. Undo the clips on either one of the RAM slots, slide in there and redo the clips, and then it's time to put in your graphics card. So you can do away with the covers on the graphics card slots, but keep that little L-shaped piece. You'll need that later. Align the slot with the port on the motherboard and slide it in there. You'll also need to undo a clip that's on the very back of the PCI slot, as you'll see here in just a moment. Here it is before you slide the graphics card in, and then replace it once you slide the graphics card in. Align the graphics card with the back of the case again, put that little L-shaped metal piece, screw it back down, and the grate covers you can do away with. There are also some plastic pieces in the case that come with the case where you can organize the cables and make sure that they're off the heatsink, off the GPU, off the motherboard, things like that. Alright, everything's in place. Now you can screw down your SSD casing. And it is time to put the back case on. Again, you can do away with these two pieces, the 3.5-inch and the back grate covers you can do away with. There are 4 screws that hold in the 2.5-inch SSD. And then once we put the back case on, there are 4 screws that hold the back case on. It kind of slides on just like we took it off. There you go. Okay, the last thing that we're going to do is put the rubber risers on the very bottom of the case. And once we do that, then it's time to boot it up and see if it's going to work. So let's check it out. Okay, it works. And there's the boot menu, and you could see how it is just booted into by pressing F2. Everything's connected and on. I removed the case for demonstrative purposes. And once we go into the boot menu, you'll want to configure a couple things in the BIOS. Number one, if you're going to be booting a couple times just to figure things out and play around, you might want to extend the time that the boot screen originally lasts. So instead of like 1 or 2 seconds, make sure it says like 5 to 20 seconds. You're also going to want to make sure that your internal graphics card is not the primary. And then you can make sure that your PCI slot is set to Gen 2, Gen 1, or Auto as the speed. You can page through the different menus and just take a look at the options there, but those are some of the main ones, and I go through that again also in ebook and just outline it in detail or in greater detail. One thing you want to do when you're in BIOS is check and make sure everything's connected and displayed, like your RAM. And then it's time to head over to the Hive OS installation guide, and you can make sure that you put your software on your computer correctly. One thing I didn't show was that I recommend flashing the SSD that you installed in housing before you put it into the computer. So again, take a look at the ebook if you want to go through and follow step by step exactly how I built this, and if not, no worries. Happy mining either way.